There is a man sitting in a prison cell in Wisconsin right now. He wakes up at the same time every morning. He eats the same food. He walks the same 40 feet of hallway. He sees the same walls. And above his bed, there are photographs. Photographs of a woman and two little girls. He put them there himself. Most people who follow this case think they know everything about Chris Watts. The murders, the affair, the interrogation, the plea deal, the sentence. But what has been happening inside that prison over the last 7.5 years, the part the cameras stopped showing, is something that even people who have followed this case from the very beginning do not fully know. I spent weeks going through court filings, Wisconsin Department of Corrections statements, letters Chris Watts actually wrote, interviews with his former cellmate, and verified reports from People magazine, the Daily Mail, and News Nation. What I found is this. Chris Watts has broken down. He has fallen apart. He has spent 7 years in what sources connected to his incarceration describe as quiet, unrelenting torment. And what is happening to him inside those walls is something most people on the outside never get to see. A source who has been in contact with Watts since his incarceration told People magazine that he lives a bleak life, that he is constantly haunted by his past, that the weight of what he did follows him from morning count to lights out with no relief and no end in sight. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly what that looks like, what it sounds like, and why many people who loved Shanann, Bella, and Celeste say what Chris Watts is enduring inside those walls is the only justice that makes sense. This is June 2026. This is verified, and this is the story the cameras stopped telling. If you're interested in true crime cases covered with depth and accuracy, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Crime with Chris. Every week, we bring you verified information on cases that continue to unfold long after the headlines fade. November 19th, 2018. Weld County Courthouse, Colorado. Judge Marcelo Kopkow had presided over thousands of cases in nearly 17 years on the bench. He had seen the worst of what human beings do to each other. And when he stood before Chris Watts that morning, he chose his words carefully. The judge stated that the words that came to mind when he heard the evidence in this case were senseless crime and viciousness. He said he could objectively say that this was perhaps the most inhumane and vicious crime that he had handled out of the thousands of cases that he had seen, and nothing less than a maximum sentence would be appropriate. 5 consecutive life sentences, plus 48 years for unlawfully terminating Shanann's pregnancy, plus 36 years for tampering with the bodies. Chris Watts will die in prison. That part is not in question. But here is what most people watching this right now don't fully understand. The sentence itself, the number, the years, the legal finality, was not the real punishment. The real punishment began the moment he walked through the doors of Dodge Correctional Institution and understood for the first time exactly what he had traded his family's lives for. 14 days after sentencing, December 3rd, 2018, the Colorado Department of Corrections transferred him out of state, not to protect Chris Watts, to protect themselves. Inmates inside Colorado facilities were already planning attacks. Death threats were flooding corrections offices. Keeping him in Colorado meant riot risk, murder risk, and catastrophic legal liability. On December 5th, 2018, he arrived at Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin. Dodge is a maximum security facility that has housed some of Wisconsin's most dangerous inmates for decades. It holds roughly 1,000 men, murderers, rapists, lifers, men who have spent years learning how to survive inside a place like this, and every one of them knows what Chris Watts did. That is where his real sentence began. Here is something that surprises almost everyone who learns it. Chris Watts is not in protective custody. He is in general population. The Wisconsin Department of Corrections confirmed this in a 2024 statement to People magazine. Chris Watts is housed in general population with access to recreation, work assignments, and religious services. He is not isolated in a solo cell for his safety. He is walking the same hallways, eating in the same cafeteria, and working alongside inmates who know he strangled his pregnant wife and stuffed his daughter's bodies through 8-inch openings into crude oil tanks. In prison, there is a hierarchy. At the very top, gang leaders, respected lifers, men with power and a reputation that keeps them safe. At the very bottom, people who hurt children, and below even them, men who killed their own children. Chris Watts has lived at the absolute floor of that hierarchy for over 7 years. Former inmate Dylan Tallman spoke to the Daily Mail in 2024 about what that position actually means. Tallman said that when you're in prison with a lot of guys who did really bad things, but you're still considered the worst person there, you're just evil. He explained that if the guards weren't always around, everyone would take a swing at him. A source connected to Watts told People magazine that he lives in a state of constant fear, that he keeps to himself, that he does not start conversations he doesn't need to have, that he survives by becoming, as much as possible, invisible. Let's walk through what a day actually looks like. This is verified through Wisconsin Department of Corrections, public records, court filings, and corrections official statements. 5:30 in the morning. Morning count. Chris Watts wakes up in his cell, general population housing, either shared or dormitory style. Guards verify every inmate, the same as the morning before, the same as tomorrow. Then he sees them, above his bunk. Photographs. Shannon smiling. Bella and Celeste hugging, the faces of the family he destroyed, before he has taken a single step into another identical day. The Wisconsin Department of Corrections confirmed this in 2019 after a public petition demanded the photos be removed. The agency's response was clear. Inmates are legally permitted to possess family photographs. There is no legal basis to remove them. And so for over 2,700 mornings, Chris Watts has opened his eyes and seen their faces before anything else. A source told People magazine in 2019 that he has nothing to do but think. He thinks about what he did every day. He is tormented by his past and the mistakes he made. 7 years later, in June 2026, that torment has not ended. It has become the texture of every single day. Work. Chris Watts works as a prison custodian, cleaning floors, maintaining common areas. This was confirmed by the Wisconsin Department of Corrections. He earns between 25 and 75 cents per hour, roughly $80 per month. A man who once owned a 5-bedroom home in Frederick, Colorado, and held a professional position at an oil and gas company, now mops the same floors in the same building for the same fraction of a dollar, week after week. Recreation is allowed once or twice per day, Monday through Friday. He has outbound phone access to an approved contact list. Every call is monitored and recorded. He cannot say a single word to anyone outside those walls without it being heard. Bible study. He attends regularly. It is one of the few constants in a life stripped of almost everything. And it is inside those letters, those monitored calls, those hours in his cell that the clearest picture of what 7.5 years has done to Chris Watts begins to emerge. Research on long-term maximum security incarceration documents a consistent pattern: chronic stress, hypervigilance, and the steady erosion of identity when every choice, every freedom, and every marker of who you were is removed. For Chris Watts, those effects are compounded by something no study can fully account for: the specific, inescapable knowledge of what he did, and the total impossibility of ever getting distance from it. He cannot log off. He cannot move away. He cannot start over. He is in the same facility, surrounded by the same men who know his name, under a sentence with no end point. A source in contact with Watts confirmed to People magazine that he is tormented, that there is no peace in that cell. And what has emerged from his letters, the letters he writes from inside Dodge, shows a man grasping for anything that provides a sense of meaning, because prison has stripped away everything else. He writes to women, He attends Bible study. He holds on to Scripture with the grip of someone who has nothing else to hold. In letters published by the Daily Mail in January 2026, written to a woman named Deborah who first contacted him in 2022, Chris Watts wrote that God had a plan for him. He wants him in prison. This is his will. Just like it was his will for Jesus to die for us. Some people read that and hear arrogance. But forensic psychologists who study long-term incarceration point to something else. A mind trying desperately to construct meaning out of a reality it cannot survive without one. When a person faces a lifetime with no exit, when the people they were close to have disappeared one by one, the mind reaches for any framework that makes the unbearable bearable. That is what 7 years has done to Chris Watts. He is not at peace. He is clinging. In August 2025, News Nation reported on letters in which Chris Watts wrote that he is a new man, that he is not the person who committed those horrible acts. Read that not as a boast. Read it as a man who desperately needs to believe the person who did those things no longer exists. Because the alternative, fully inhabiting the identity of someone who planned his family's murders for weeks, who secretly gave his pregnant wife OxyContin in an attempt to end her pregnancy, who tried to smother his daughters in their beds before driving them to an oil field, is something no mind can carry unprotected for decades at a time. In June 2021, Inside Edition reported confessions Chris Watts had made to a pen pal. Confessions he never gave to investigators. He admitted the murders were planned for several weeks. He admitted he secretly gave Shannon OxyContin because he believed ending the pregnancy would make it easier to leave her and be with Nicole Kessinger. He admitted that on the night of August 12, 2018, he tried to smother Bella and Celeste in their beds while they slept. He failed. They woke up. According to Watts's own confession to investigators, Bella had already seen what happened. She watched him drag her mother's body down the stairs, wrapped in a sheet. She was crying. She asked him what was wrong with Mommy. He told her Mommy was sick. He then loaded both girls into the back seat of his truck alongside their mother's body and drove 40 minutes to the oil site where he worked. His daughters dozed in and out, lying in each other's laps. At the oil site, both girls asked him what he was doing to Mommy. He didn't answer. Investigators later confirmed Bella's final words to her father, spoken just before he killed her, were 3 words: "Daddy, no." A woman who visited Watts in prison and later spoke with ABC News described the moment he talked about the murders. She said his eyes would go dark, that he spoke about it with a detachment that she found deeply unsettling, as though he were describing something that had happened to someone else. 7 years later, those memories exist in the same cell as him. They are there when he wakes up and sees those photographs. They are there when he mops the floor. They are there when the lights go out. There is no distance from it. That is not speculation. That is what long-term incarceration in a maximum security facility does. And for Chris Watts, the weight of those specific memories is something that no Bible verse and no pen pal letter will ever fully cover. In 2022, People magazine cited a source who said Chris Watts had been corresponding with multiple women throughout his incarceration. Some send letters. Some send money to his commissary account. His former fellow inmate, Dylan Tallman, spoke to the Daily Mail in 2024. Tallman said Watts will talk to a girl and she becomes his everything really fast. He becomes obsessed with a woman, and she becomes all he can think of. Psychologists who study long-term incarceration are clear on why this happens. Human beings require social connection to function, and when every normal avenue of connection is closed, no family nearby, no friends, no relationship, no private conversation, a person will hold on to whatever remains. For Chris Watts, what remains is letters, monitored phone calls, women who write back. Psychologists call the phenomenon that draws some people to convicted killers hybristophilia, an attraction to people who have committed serious crimes. Some believe they can save these men. Others are drawn to the notoriety. Some are simply seeking connection themselves. In his letters to Deborah, written in October 2025, Chris Watts wrote that he believes that in a different time he would have been able to be with her, but God has other plans for his life. Whether you read that as calculated or as genuine, either way, the picture it draws is the same. A 41-year-old man in a Wisconsin maximum security prison, earning pennies an hour, spending what little he earns on stamps, writing to a woman he will never meet, telling her they cannot be together because God said so. That is not the life he believed he was building on August 13th, 2018. That is what is left of it. Beyond the isolation, beyond the monotony, beyond the letters and the photographs and the memories, there is something else Chris Watts lives with every hour of every day: physical danger. In the prison hierarchy, men who kill their own children occupy the very lowest position, not because other inmates are morally upstanding people, but because in a world where reputation determines survival, targeting someone below you is a way to establish dominance. And there is no one below Chris Watts. The fact that he remains in general population means he walks past men every single day who could decide at any moment that earning respect inside those walls is worth the consequences. Former inmates have confirmed that guards provide a level of protection, but guards cannot be everywhere. Hallways have blind spots. Showers have limited visibility. Common areas have moments of chaos. And in those moments, Chris Watts is more vulnerable than almost anyone else inside that facility. Dylan Tallman, who served time alongside Watts, made clear that the only reason physical violence hasn't been constant is because the guards are always around. Remove that presence, even temporarily, and the outcome changes. That is not a life sentence measured in years. That is a life sentence measured in minutes. Every walk to the cafeteria, every trip to the shower, every moment in a room with men who have nothing to lose and a reputation to gain. What does that do to a person over 7.5 years? Sources describe a man who has become hyper-aware of his surroundings, who avoids eye contact, who does not engage unless absolutely necessary, who has learned that invisibility is the closest thing to safety available to him. Psychologists who work with long-term inmates describe this as a survival adaptation. The personality doesn't just change, it compresses. Everything that made someone recognizable as an individual begins to collapse inward, leaving only the mechanisms required to make it through one more day. Chris Watts is no longer the man who worked at Anadarko Petroleum. He is no longer the man who lived in a suburban home with a garage and a backyard. He is no longer the man who posted on social media, or went to barbecues or had friends over on weekends. Those versions of him are gone. What remains is a man whose entire existence has shrunk to the boundaries of a maximum security prison, the rhythm of a custodian's work schedule, the words written in letters to strangers, and the photographs above a bed he will sleep in for the rest of his life. People magazine reported that a source close to Watts described him as living with relentless guilt, that he wakes up thinking about what he did, that he goes to sleep thinking about it, that there is no moment in his day when the reality of Shannon, Bella, and Celeste is not present. Some might hear that and think it sounds like remorse. Others hear it and recognize it as something closer to psychological imprisonment within a physical one. Either way, it is a reality he cannot escape. Judge Kopkow said in that courtroom on November 19, 2018, that nothing less than a maximum sentence would be appropriate. He did not just mean the number of years. He meant the totality of what those years would contain. And 7.5 years in, the totality is becoming clearer. Chris Watts is not serving time in the way most people imagine when they hear the phrase life sentence. He is living inside a structure designed to ensure that every single day carries the weight of what he did, that there is no comfort, no reprieve, no version of normal. The letters he writes suggest a man searching for meaning in a place that offers none. The Bible study he attends suggests a man reaching for forgiveness in a system that has no mechanism to provide it. The photographs he keeps above his bed suggest a man who cannot let go, or perhaps more accurately, a man who understands that letting go is not an option available to him. In his correspondence with Deborah, Chris Watts wrote about belief, about faith, about God's plan. He framed his incarceration not as punishment, but as purpose. Psychologists point out that this kind of reframing is common among those serving life sentences. The mind cannot function indefinitely under the belief that existence is pointless, so it constructs a narrative. It finds a reason. It builds a framework, no matter how fragile, that allows the person to continue. For Chris Watts, that framework is religious. He has written that he believes God wanted him in prison, that this is part of a divine plan, that his suffering has meaning beyond punishment. Whether that belief is sincere, or whether it is a psychological defense mechanism designed to make the unbearable tolerable, is a question that may not have a clear answer. What is clear is that without it, the alternative would be to face decades of incarceration with no narrative at all. Just time, just consequences, just the photographs and the memories and the men in the hallway who know exactly who he is. The Wisconsin Department of Corrections has made clear that Chris Watts is not receiving special treatment. He is subject to the same rules, the same schedule, the same conditions as every other inmate in general population. That means he experiences the same noise, the same lack of privacy, the same limited access to the outside world. But unlike many other inmates, Chris Watts cannot claim innocence. He cannot appeal. He cannot hope for parole. He cannot imagine a future outside those walls. His case is closed. His guilt is established. His sentence is final. What he is left with is the day-to-day experience of being the man who killed Shannon, Bella, and Celeste. Not in the abstract sense that people on the outside experience when they read about the case, but in the tangible, physical, relentless sense of living in a space where that identity is the only one that matters, where his name is synonymous with what he did, where there is no separating Chris, Watts the person, from Chris, Watts the family annihilator. That is what sources mean when they describe his life as bleak. That is what they mean when they say he is tormented. It is not a poetic description. It is a clinical one. He is a man living in a state of permanent consequence with no possibility of distance, no opportunity for reinvention, and no hope of a different outcome. And yet, he continues. He wakes up. He goes to work. He attends Bible study. He writes letters. He looks at the photographs. 7.5 years of this. 2,737 days. As of June 2026. And if he lives another 30 years, another 40, he will add another 10,000 days to that count. Same facility, same routine, same memories, same walls. This is the part of the Chris Watts case that doesn't make headlines anymore. The part that happens slowly, quietly, in the repetition of days that all look the same. The part that courtroom cameras don't capture. The part that doesn't have the dramatic arc of an interrogation or a trial. But it is the part that many people who loved Shannon, Bella, and Celeste believe is the most important, because it is the part where justice is not a verdict. It is a lived experience, and it does not end. If you found this deep dive into the reality of Chris Watts' prison life valuable, please hit that like button and subscribe to Crime with Chris. In the prison hierarchy, men who kill their own children occupy the very lowest position. Not because other inmates are morally upstanding people, but because in a world where reputation determines survival, targeting someone below you is a way to establish dominance. And there is no one below Chris Watts. Most inmates in maximum security facilities have someone who matters to them. A child, a niece, a nephew, a daughter. The act of killing your own kids is something the prison population agrees, in its own way, is unforgivable. Former inmate Dylan Tallman, speaking to the New York Post, was direct. If the guards weren't always around, everyone would take a swing at him. Chris Watts knows this. A source connected to him told People magazine he is aware of exactly where he stands inside that facility. He has been aware of it every day for over 7 years. Every mealtime, he is calculating. Every hallway, he is measuring. Every new inmate who arrives, he is watching. One wrong moment, one guard who looks away, one transfer that doesn't go according to protocol. That awareness never switches off. It is not a thought he can choose to stop having. It is built into the reality of where he is. Imagine carrying that for 7 years. Then imagine carrying it for 35 more. There is a recorded phone call from inside Dodge Correctional Institution that most people have never heard. Chris Watts speaking with a private investigator and a woman named Anna, who appears in his verified prison visitation records as one of his approved visitors. In this call, you hear something that no second-hand account fully conveys. You hear his voice? He talks about the law, about whether his confession could be legally challenged, about whether the polygraph was administered correctly, about whether there is any ground left he hasn't tried. And then, at the end of it, he says, "I just want to get out of here. I know that God has a plan for me. It's not to be in prison right now, not with anger, not with the energy of someone who believes they have a real chance, with the hollow, exhausted sound of a man who has said it to himself 1,000 times and is finally saying it out loud. I just want to get out of here." He won't. 5 life sentences plus 84 additional years. No parole, no commutation, no realistic legal path to freedom. The Colorado death penalty, abolished in 2020, was never a factor after his plea deal. There is no door. There is no clock running out. There is only the facility. The same walls, the same routine. Shannon's father, Frank Ruchek, said it clearly. I don't want him to die. I want him to spend his life in prison, thinking about what he did every single day. That phone call is what thinking about it every single day actually sounds like. Not rage, not defiance, exhaustion. 7 years in, with no end coming. In the weeks after his arrest, his parents, Ronnie and Cindy, stood by him. They visited. They sent money. In December 2018, Cindy Watts gave an interview to ABC's 20/20, suggesting Shannon's personality had contributed to the murders, a statement that caused national outrage and devastated the Zhuchek family. But here is what has happened since. According to multiple reports, the relationship between Chris Watts and his parents has significantly deteriorated. Public support from his family has all but disappeared. His sister, Jamie Williams, has been completely silent for years. No statements. No public presence in his life. Shannon's family wants no contact with him. Frank Ruchek has been clear about that. And according to Dylan Tallman, Chris Watts speaks about feeling abandoned, about how unfair his situation is. Sit with that for a moment. The parents who defended him, distant. The sister, gone silent. The friends, non-existent. The wife, the daughters, the unborn son, dead by his own deliberate choices. He is surrounded by roughly 1,000 men in that facility, and he is completely alone. That isolation, that specific aloneness, is not something the sentence created. It is something Chris Watts created. And what 7 years inside Dodge Correctional Institution has done is give him no choice but to live inside it every day, with no way out and nothing to fill it except monitored phone calls and letters from women who don't fully know what they are writing to. Dr. Lena Derhally, the licensed psychotherapist who wrote My Daddy is a Hero. How Chris Watts went from family man to family killer, concluded after extensive research that Chris Watts is a covert narcissist, someone who required constant external validation to function. In his previous life, that validation came from all directions: his family, his affair, the performance of being the good husband, the good father, the reliable employee. Prison has reduced that to almost nothing. Letters, a chaplain, an occasional approved phone call. Strip even those away, and what remains is a man alone with what he did, in a cell in Wisconsin, with no one coming. Every morning, before Chris Watts takes a step into another day that is identical to the one before it, he looks at the images above his bunk. Shannon smiling, Bella and Celeste hugging. The Wisconsin Department of Corrections confirmed in 2019, after a petition circulated demanding their removal, that there is no legal basis to take them down. Family photographs are permitted property, so they stay. Some people believe those photographs represent the most severe dimension of his punishment. That before the cafeteria, before the mop, before the monitored call, he is required every single morning to look at the faces of the people he planned and chose to destroy. His 4-year-old daughter, his 3-year-old daughter, the woman who was 15 weeks pregnant with his son, Bella, who saw him drag her mother's body down the stairs and asked what was wrong with Mommy. That question does not go away. It has not gone away in over 2,700 mornings. And based on everything verified about his sentence, it will not go away for roughly 12,000 more mornings to come. Those photographs are not going anywhere, and neither is he. The distance between the life captured in those images, the smiling family in Frederick, Colorado, and the cell in Wisconsin where he looks at them every morning, is a distance that no letter, no scripture, no legal strategy, and no amount of time will ever close. That distance is his sentence. This is the question at the center of this case. And it is the question many people are asking directly. Is life in prison, specifically Chris Watts' life in prison, actually worse than execution? Chris Watts is 41 years old, born May 16, 1985. Based on average American male life expectancy, he has approximately 35 more years inside Dodge Correctional Institution. 35 more years of 5:30 a.m. counts. 35 more years mopping floors for 50 cents an hour. 35 more years as the man at the very bottom of a prison hierarchy. 35 more years with no private moment, no free choice, no path out. 35 more years waking up to those photographs. When he dies, whether from illness, from old age, or from something that happens in that general population facility, he will very likely be buried in a prison cemetery. No ceremony, no announcement, no one pausing to mark it. Many people who supported the death penalty in this case believe that keeping Chris Watts alive was mercy. That execution would have been real justice. But here is what the death penalty would have given him that life in prison does not. An end. A defined moment when the mornings stop coming. A last breath, and then nothing. No more photographs. No more 40-foot hallway. No more floor to mop. Chris Watts does not get an end. He gets 35 more years of the same morning. The same walls. The same men who would take a swing at him if the guards weren't there. The same monitored calls to women who will eventually stop writing back. The same photographs waiting above his bunk. And the world will not stop watching. The Netflix documentary released in 2020 ensured this case never fades. New generations discover it constantly. Young people who weren't following the news in 2018 now know every detail. The body cam footage, the neighborhood interview, the polygraph, the oil tanks. His infamy is not diminishing. It is being inherited. He will never outrun it. He will never be forgotten. He will never be anonymous. Shannon's father, Frank Ruchik, said he doesn't want Chris Watts to die. He wants him to live with it every day for the rest of his life. In June 2026, nearly 2,878 days after the murders, that is exactly what is happening. Shannon Watts was 34 years old. Bella Watts was 4. Celeste Watts was 3. Nico Watts never took a breath. They did not get 35 more years. They did not get another morning. Shannon did not get to hold the son she was carrying. Bella did not get to start school. Celeste did not get to grow into the little girl those home videos were already showing her becoming. And in a maximum security prison in Wisconsin, The man who took all of that from them wakes up every morning to their photographs. He mops floors for 50 cents an hour. He writes letters to women he will never meet. He holds a Bible in a cell he will never leave. He moves carefully through hallways full of men who would hurt him without hesitation if given the chance. He makes phone calls that are recorded, monitored, and will never result in freedom. He falls asleep, and tomorrow he will wake up and do it again. For 35 more years. Shanann's father said he wants Chris Watts to spend every day of his life thinking about what he did. In June 2026, nearly 2,878 days after the murders, he is still in that cell, still waking up to those faces, still thinking about it. That is the sentence inside the sentence, and it has barely begun. The question of whether life in prison is worse than execution is not an abstract philosophical debate when applied to Chris Watts. It is a measurable reality. Death ends suffering. Life prolongs it. Death provides closure. Life denies it. Death removes the condemned from the world. Life keeps them in it, frozen in consequence, unable to move forward or back. For Chris Watts, every morning is a reminder that he is alive and they are not, that he has choices, even if those choices are only which Bible verse to read or which woman to write to, and they have none, that he has time. Decades of it stretching ahead, and they were given none. The cruelty of his sentence is not in its harshness. It is in its relentlessness. It does not spike. It does not climax. It simply continues, day after day, year after year, with no variation and no relief. Psychologists who study long-term incarceration describe a phenomenon called temporal distortion. When every day is the same, time stops functioning the way it does in the outside world. Days blur, weeks disappear, years collapse into an indistinguishable mass. But certain moments remain sharp. The morning count, the photographs, the memory of what was lost. For Chris Watts, that means 7.5 years can feel both like a lifetime and like yesterday. And 35 more years will feel the same. He is not waiting for anything. There is no parole hearing to prepare for, no appeal to file, no realistic hope of clemency. He is simply existing in a state of permanent consequence. And that state, according to sources who have been in contact with him, is bleak beyond what most people can imagine. Not because of physical abuse, though the threat is always present. Not because of deprivation, though prison conditions are harsh, but because of the totality of it. The complete, inescapable knowledge that this is all there is, that this is all there will ever be. Frank Razuchek said he wanted Chris Watts to think about what he did every single day. But thinking is not enough to describe what happens in that cell. Thinking implies an active process, something chosen. What Chris Watts experiences is closer to haunting. The past does not visit him. It lives with him. It is the air in the cell. It is the face in the photographs. It is the reason for the monitored calls and the bottom-tier status and the eyes that follow him in the hallway. He cannot escape it by sleeping. Sources who have studied his case and spoken with people connected to his incarceration describe a man who has nightmares, who wakes up disoriented, who in the moments before full consciousness sometimes forgets where he is and what he did. And then he remembers, and then he sees the photographs, and the day begins again. This is not a story about redemption. There will be no moment where Chris Watts earns forgiveness. There will be no interview where he says the right words and people soften. There will be no second act. This is a story about consequence in its purest, most undiluted form, about what happens when every escape route is closed and every buffer is removed and a person is left with nothing but the reality of what they chose to do. The Netflix documentary, American Murder, The Family Next Door, has been watched by millions of people worldwide. It brought the case to audiences who had never heard of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, or Chris Watts, and it ensured that his name, his face, and his crime will never fade into obscurity. Every year, new viewers discover the footage, the doorbell camera, the neighbor's security video, the police body cam, the porch interview where he begs for his family to come home, knowing exactly where they are. That footage is permanent. It is archived. It is shared. It is studied in criminal psychology courses. It is analyzed in true crime communities. And it means that Chris Watts will never be able to distance himself from August 13th, 2018. He will never be remembered as anything other than the man who annihilated his family. Not in 5 years, not in 10, not in 35. When he dies, whether in 2061 or 2070 or whenever his body finally gives out, the obituary will not mention his work as a custodian. It will not mention his Bible study. It will mention Shannon. It will mention Bella. It will mention Celeste. It will mention Nico. That is his legacy. That is what 7.5 years in prison has clarified beyond any doubt. So is life in prison worse than execution? For Chris Watts, the answer may depend on who you ask. If you ask him, in the exhausted voice on that recorded phone call, the answer seems clear. He wants out. He has wanted out since the day he arrived, and he will want out every single day for the next 35 years. If you ask Shannon's family, the answer is equally clear. They do not want him to have the mercy of an ending. They want him to carry it every day, for as long as he lives. And if you ask the question from a purely objective standpoint, looking only at the facts, the answer is this: execution would have been over in minutes. His suffering would have ended. The case would have closed. Life in prison means he will suffer for decades. It means the case will never fully close. It means he will wake up 2,878 mornings from now, if he lives that long, and he will still see those photographs. He will still be in that cell. He will still be thinking about it. That is not mercy. That is the opposite of mercy. And for the people who loved Shannon, Bella, Celeste, and Nico, that is exactly the point. Shannon Watts was a wife, a mother, a friend, a daughter. She loved with intensity. She posted every smile, every milestone, every moment of her life because she believed in joy and she believed in sharing it. She was 15 weeks pregnant with a son she had already named, Nico Lee Watts, a boy who would never take a breath because his father decided he was inconvenient. Bella Watts was 4 years old. She loved her little sister. She asked questions. She trusted the man who was supposed to protect her. And in her final moments, she said 3 words that will be part of this case forever. Daddy, no. Celeste Watts was 3 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. Birthdays, first days of school, friendships, dreams. None of that will happen. Because on August 13th, 2018, her father decided his family was in the way of the life he wanted. And Nico, who was never given the chance to be anything other than a possibility, a name, a hope, was erased before he could exist. Those 4 people did not get 35% more years. They did not get another morning. They did not get a choice. Chris Watts took all of that from them. And now, in a maximum security prison in Wisconsin, he is living with the knowledge of what he did every single day, with no end in sight and no way out. That is the sentence inside the sentence. That is the justice Frank Ruchek was asking for. And in June 2026, 7.5 years after the murders, that justice is being served. Not in a courtroom, not in a headline, in a cell, every morning, for the rest of his life. If this case means something to you, if Shannon, Bella, Celeste, and Nico mean something to you, leave a comment. Tell me whether you believe life in prison is actually a harsher sentence than execution, whether what Chris Watts is living through is justice, or whether you think the death penalty would have served these victims better. This community takes these questions seriously, and I read every comment. If this is the kind of verified, deeply researched true crime content you want more of, subscribe to Crime with Chris. We cover these cases the way they deserve to be covered, with facts, with respect for the people who were lost, and with a commitment to never letting their names be forgotten. Shannon, Bella, Celeste, Nico. Remember their names. She loved with everything she had, posted every smile, every laugh. Two little girls with bright eyes, an endless possibility. A baby boy she never got to hold. She drove through the dark to get back home, not knowing those were her final hours. The world was sleeping when the lights went out, and the girls who called her mama made no sound. We saw the videos. We know their names. We watched the story unfold, and we felt the pain. They were real. They were here. They were everything. Shannon, we see you in every mother who fights to protect her children. We see you in every woman who loved too much and trusted too deeply. Bella, we see you in every 4-year-old who asks questions and believes the answers. Celeste, sweet Celeste, only 3 years old. And Nico, little Nico, you never got to see the world. But we remember. We remember every single one of you. Bella held her blanket close and asked a question no child should ever have to ask. She trusted the one who should have kept her safe. And that is something time will never erase. We hear Celeste's laugh in every joyful child. We see her smile in every innocent moment. They deserved a lifetime. They deserved the years. They deserved a world that wouldn't disappear. Shannon, you were enough. You were more than enough. You were a mother, a fighter, a heart full of love. And those 2 little girls were your whole world. And Nico, you were already loved before you ever arrived. We see you in every mother who fights to survive. We hear you in every child who gets to stay alive. The world should have been yours to know, Bella and Celeste. And Nico, little Nico, we grieve the life you never got to grow. But we remember. We will never let the world forget your names. Justice came, but it cannot bring back the life you lived, the love you had, the mornings you should still be in. The world lost 4 lives that should still be here. And in a prison cell in Wisconsin, the man responsible wakes up every day to the faces of the people he destroyed. That is the sentence. That is the consequence. And it will continue for the rest of his life. We remember. Shannon, Bella, Celeste, Nico, we will always remember.